14 months, not quite 15 months old, and she was riding in the back seat, and he gave her a what are those little lifesaver candies, which you should never give a child, I guess, and she started choking on it. He looked in the rearview mirror, and she was standing there, just not breathing, and he stopped the car quick, pulled her out upside down, whacked her on the back, and that flew out of her mouth. He told me that later when he came to the hospital to get me. That was when he was on his way up to bring us home. And I thought, oh my God, what if he'd have lost her on the way home before we got the baby home? So that was Linda's near miss.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Go across our backyard about 2 blocks to school, which to me that was just great. Didn't even have to get on the road much. They cut across the fields, and that was kind of neat. And then you all went through grade school, all went to Sauk. And then Elliot, when he come along, then they had a chance. Somebody sponsored him to go to St. Al's in Sauk. So he went there in grade school, and of course he had to ride a bus every day, and I always felt kind of sorry for him, have to ride a bus back and forth when he could have just shot up to school.
Yeah.
But that's what he did, so that was a little change. But you kids all got your education in Merrimack and Sauk City. Well, the girls were trying to pull him up. Well, I always kind of blame myself for that because I saw him from the front porch, and I'd always said, don't be climbing trees, you're going to get hurt, you know. So I looks down and sees those girls pulling him up in the tree by the legs, and I opened the window and I yelled, what are you guys doing? And about that time, I think that's why you all let loose the rope. If I'd have kept my mouth shut, maybe you'd have managed. But somehow, Georgie fell, and reaching out to save himself, he landed on his wrist, and his wrist was out of place. It was like off here, and it broke his arm in here. A green tree, they called it, fracture. It's not the worst kind, I guess. At least but anyway, poor guy, he had to go to the doctor the next morning. We managed to keep him at home, but I tied it up in bed so it was higher in his head. Because I think I called the doctor and he said bring him in the morning. So he had a lot of pain in the night with that poor broken arm, you know. But we got him up there and he got it fixed, and so that he got over it okay. He didn't injure. But what happened was I told the doctor his hand was off weird because it was out of joint, and I just picked his hand up and it snapped right back in place. His wrist was out of place. So that's probably what made him so sore too. But he said, that was good. The doctor said, like, I didn't do the wrong thing anyway. Well, how could you take him to the hospital like this? So that scared me half to death. But Dad was at work at the power plant. That's what usually when these weird things happen. Dad was never around. Remember? Run his sled into a tree or something, and he'd have a broken nose or a spot in his forehead always broken open. I wonder he doesn't have a scar there yet. Or he'd run around the schoolhouse, they were playing games, and run into a girl smack in the face and broke his nose one time.
Marty.
He seemed to be the one that always got hurt in the face. Stanley one time was playing over to Rachel's, and he was only about 5 or 6, and he was up on a shed where to get a ball that had gone up on the roof, and he thought he could reach it. He climbed up on his roof. Just then the parents came home, the Rachels, and the kids thought, well, he shouldn't be climbing up here, so he jumps down kind of backwards and lands on his foot wrong and sprained his ankle. So I had to take him to the doctor. He had a pretty darn sore foot for a while, poor kid. And then I scolded them because they weren't supposed to be off our street to play. They were supposed to be in our own yard. Most of the time we just have neighbor kids in our yard, but once that time they somehow wandered over to Rachel's, across the main street, you know, and that was always kind of forbidden. We didn't want them going uptown and crossing the main street. It's more dangerous. About 17, with a boy in sock, was driving. He didn't have decent brakes, and he went to stop behind a truck on a bridge in sock that was doing some work there, and his brakes didn't work. He hit the back of the truck. So they all ended up at the hospital, and Marty, or Ronnie rather, they didn't think he was too badly hurt because he got pitched from the back seat into the front and landed on his head and shoulders. And it did something to it. He had a couple of compressed vertebrae, but they didn't know it right away, and then afterward they found out, they made him lay right in bed, and they said that he very well could have become paralyzed. So we were fortunate. So he had a kind of a sore back for a year, and I helped him a lot. Every night a back rub. Remember that? That was kind of a thing. But you know, when he went back to school, I got older, they offered, the insurance offered to, he could have gone and took a job, sit-down job, and got compensation, you know. But he said, I don't want to do that, I want to work. So he worked hard, and his back got better. Otherwise, he might have been sitting around like a vegetable the rest of his days. So he went in the Air Force and got built up. He don't seem to, I don't think he has much trouble with his back, but he doesn't have a couple of compressed vertebrae from that accident. Kenny got diabetes at 13, just right on his 13th birthday practically. Yeah, he hadn't felt good for a few days, and I thought he was sunburned because he got all red in the face, and it was hot. As soon as school was out, they were out here swimming, and then he'd come home just exhausted and all red in the face, and I just thought he got too much heat. So that night, it was a Friday, I called the doctor and I said, we think Kenny might have got too much heat, and he's sunburned, and he said, well, bring him up Monday morning to the office, we'll check him. So by night, I think it was the same night, he slept on the front porch. It was hot upstairs. And the next morning he was breathing weird, you know. So he took him to I took him up to emergency room, and the doctor right away smelled his breath and said he's got diabetes. So that's what it was. I was glad he was able to find out right away. But anyway, from then on, he's had to take his shots. And now he's 53, so it's 40 years since he got sick. First place. I was always thankful none of the rest of the kids got it. I don't know how come he did. But he'd had strep throat that spring, and the doctor said sometimes that will, they said he was a carrier afterward. He had the strep in his throat. They said that will sometimes push a kid into diabetes or something, a shock to the system or something, I don't know. So he's always had to have shots. Insulin.
Did he have strep that week
He'd had
leading
strep
up
that
to?
spring, yeah.
Oh, so it was like a month later.
Yeah,
then.
it was a month or so later, then he came down with the diabetes.
Oh.
He was just 13. School had just got out, you know, a few days, you know. So, but he's did pretty well. Now it'll be 2 years ago this, well, a year and a half since he had the heart surgery, and his diabetes has been more erratic, and his heart isn't so good. So he had a heart attack that went on 2 or 3 days before he went to the doctor. Well, he's not in the best of health. He's had an eye surgery now last April. Can't see much out of that left eye yet, but they're supposed to gradually get better. I hope it seems to be getting a little better, but he still can't see much out of it. He was waiting out there, and he was so little, you know, and we thought we were watching him, but he fell. Well, after he fell, he couldn't get up, you know, because the water was just deep enough. And Uncle Marvin saved his life, Marvin Cryer.
Betty Flengy saved
Grabbed him and
Stanley's
pulled him
life
out.
once
She
too.
probably did too.
Once when Stanley was about 3 years old, he went right up to the end of the pier and just jumped off.
They got
And Betty Flengy saw him, and it was like an Olympic diver. She
Ah!
ran the length of the pier and dove in and came up with Stanley, and we were all going, yay!
Poor Stanley, he was the one that little Dickens left telling that. He's just lucky to be here yet.
Well, we big ones were supposed to be watching him, and all of a sudden everybody was out in the water. We all saw Stanley go in,
Where's
and
Stanley?
you can't move that fast through the water. But Betty was on the beach, and we all went, "No, Stanley's down!" And Betty, she just dove in and came up with him.
Well, that's about what Marvin did, and he cried a little bit, it scared him. That was a Sunday and we were right there, but never
Well, that's when it happens.
And these little kids. That started when, how big were you about then? Do you remember?
You know, the way I recall it was when we were little, we were always saying, "How come we never get to go camping?" And finally, Dad said, "Okay, let's camp out at the sawmill." So we all came, and you two put a mattress in the back of the station wagon and slept there. And we kids slept out, and we had a bonfire, and we had so much fun. And then Dad started slowly turning it into a campground.
Yeah.
And I think it was because
We
we
had
all
a-
had so much fun just doing
I
that.
had a little cottage up there that he had bought from Devil's Lake or somewhere. And we put an old mattress or two in there, and some of you slept in that. And the boys slept on the back of the truck outside, remember? They had sleeping bags. And somehow or other, they all had a place to sleep though, and that was camping out, and they thought it was fun. Because other people were starting to camp here, and they thought they were missing something.
And then Dad, talk about what you did with the beach.
Oh yeah, he filled the beach in.
Yeah,
There was a lot of trees there,
There was
so it
all
was just like a
brush and-
swamp.
Marsh, yeah.
brush and everything down
Swampy.
there, yeah. It was all, you could drive by on the highway and you couldn't see the water, you know. All that willow brush, like that, big stuff. Anyway, I figured on filling it in, I had that big sandhill back here. So I started doing it myself, you know, with a lift truck, and I had a bulldozer that filled it, bucket up and hauled it down, and I made the driveway in here and the driveway down there, and Sean Gahagan, he was a highway commissioner at that time, and he was a friend of mine, and we were in the same outfit in World War II, you know. And he said, "Why don't you have the county come down here and help you out?" And he says, "They can fill that in for you in just a few days." And so he says, "You'll have to go through the town chairman." So I went down to, what do you call it?
Yeah, we lived in the town then.
Yeah, we lived in town then, and anyway, I went down and seen, what the hell was his name then, the chairman, I can't think of his name right now.
The who? The chairman.
Huh?
The what?
The town chairman at
Oh,
that
the
time.
town chairman, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I can't think. Well, at that time, this was out in the town, we were in the village, of course, living at the time. But then later we got annexed to the village, a lot later, a few years ago.
Anyway, I went and seen him, and he says, "Yeah, you're gonna have to make a $800 deposit and pay the bill." And so we got a Michigan loader down and two big 8-yard dump trucks, you know, and they loaded up out of the sand pit. They dug that big hole back there and hauled it all down here and filled that all in. That was all swamps and bogs. There were bogs like cabbage heads, you'd step on them, you know, and they'd tip over and you'd go in the muck way up to here. So it took 3 days to fill that in down there. And of course, it cost me about $3,500 to fill that all in. And well, everybody thought it was all for public, you know. I let everybody go down there and swim and horse around there for 5 years, and finally they started getting kind of rough and I got sick of it, so I just told them it's the end of that, no more coming in here. If you want to come, you're going to have to ask, you know. And well, that's the way it's been ever since.
Oh, no, it was,
Cost me $3,500
we
to
just
fill
had
that
to
in.
kind of watch and worry. There was everybody's kids coming here. Right? Sometimes afraid somebody's going to get hurt or something's going to happen. You know, we had an old wooden raft that he made on a couple of barrels. Kids would ride on that and even got to fighting over it sometimes, remember?
Yeah.
So it got to be a little much after a while, but at least we got the kids away from jumping off the river bridge, and
Yeah, that's what started
that
it
terrified us when we found out our older kids were hanging out with that bunch that was jumping in the water. Afraid somebody's going to get hurt. And they
Somebody
couldn't.
jumped off there and there was a big floating piece of wood and got their head busted open.
Who was that?
I don't remember.
It was a big community service to have the swimming beach, you know. Yeah, people came from all over to swim there.
Well, then when we got campers here too, it got to be a little too much. We had to let our campers use it. And we couldn't let all the village kids just come and go as they pleased. So we had to kind of put a little kibosh to some of that. A lot of
Yeah.
those kids will tell you they had a lot of fun out here when they were kids.
Yeah.
We sure did.
And
I
even
remember the
Dolly
time.
Ott, did you ever know her? Big heavy set woman, weighed 300 pounds. And she had a little stand across the river where she sold stuff. And then nights at midnight when she closed that, she'd come over here. Is it okay if I go out on your pier and swim at night? She didn't want to be out there in the daytime.
went down there
They'd see her.
bare-ass,
She
you
was
know.
huge. But she would come and bring some of her helpers, and they'd try to be quiet, and we let them do it. And she really appreciated that. And then later she bought herself one of these big swimming pools for her own yard out there on 113, not far from where the store is now. There's a home on the left up on a hill. I don't know if you know where that is, but that's where she lived. And she got herself a big swimming pool so she could swim at home. But she used to come here and she always told us how much she appreciated that. She's quite the
They didn't make swimsuits in her size, huh?
Dahlia.
I remember her seeing her in swimsuit eventually.
She probably did have one. I never
Yeah.
got out here in the middle of the night. Kenny about the raft. They were neighbor kids and they didn't think Kenny had any rights, I guess, or something. And Kenny swore at him. And their mother called me at night. Kenny used some foul language in front of her girls and she didn't like it. And I thought, well, you know, what do? You got all these kids. I couldn't be out there every day watching, so I expected the kids, the bigger ones, to watch the little ones, I suppose. So we're lucky nobody got drowned, right?
So when Alice would come out here and watch the kids swim, and she did it a lot, and what happened was she'd get home, and at her eulogy, her funeral, they were all telling how, you know, Lawrence, her husband, would come home and expect dinner, and she'd be coming in just 5 minutes before him and say, "Let's fry some onions quickly, kids. He'll think I've been working on dinner for an hour."
That sounds like Alice. She always had time to go out and socialize.
Yeah. She spent all afternoon at the beach, but she got home and quickly fried some onions.
Well, you remember,
So Lawrence wouldn't wonder what was going on all afternoon.
remember she was quite the Alice.
She
But you know,
was.
if anybody was sick in town, she was the one that always went and visited and
She did,
stuff.
yeah, she was good.
She was